Welcome to the DataStack show. We are going to talk with Shinji from Select Star today. And Kostas, this is a really interesting, they describe the company in a really interesting way. They call it data discovery, but they sit in the data governance space. And so I'm really interested to ask about what data discovery means and then how that plays into data governance, because you don't, when I think about the term governance, I don't think about terminology like discovery. So that is, that's an interesting, not a juxtaposition of terms, but, an interesting set of terms to describe the product. So that's what I'm going to ask about. How about you?
Yeah, I guess before you govern the data, you have to discover what kind of data you have, right? So it's probably a requirement for governance. I think historically also data governance was all built around data catalogs, and dictionaries. So I guess there is an overlap there. But anyway, yeah, it's a very, very interesting topic. I think we see many companies out there, new startups, that one way or another they implement a small part of data governance, and they try to create a new category of products. But at the end, okay, all these are things that one way or another they are already in use out there in the industry. So yeah, what I really appreciate with Select Star is how they are not trying to create a new category, right? They say it's data governance what we are doing. I'd love to hear what are the challenges of building a product like this today, right? With all these different pieces of infrastructure out there, the complex data stacks that customers are using, I think I'll probably focus a lot on the solution itself and how what kind of challenges they are facing during the building the product.
Absolutely. Let's dive in and talk with Shinji.
Yeah, let's do it.
Outro. What an interesting show. I think one of my big takeaways was I just appreciated how Shinji was, she had strong opinions about what types of things a machine should handle. And I know that's come up on the show a number of times, but I'm just a huge fan of, if you can remove the unnecessary laborious parts of working from data from, say the data engineer, the analyst role, it allows them to not only probably enjoy their work more, but be more valuable because they're spending time doing more valuable stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciated that. At the same time, it's a really challenging problem as evidenced by some of the technical things that you discussed, right? So just handing something to a machine, doesn't always work out perfectly. So anyways, that was my big takeaway and what I'll be thinking about. How about you?
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear how complex of problem data governance is. There are so many moving parts, and you have to synthesize information from and integrate information from so many different sources. So it's pretty hard to make something to make a product that can actually help you in data governance, the experiences that are on the product that you have to build, and the reliability of the technology underlying. It's kind of crazy. I think it's a very big challenge, and I have a feeling that more and more companies out there that they position themselves one way or another, but they are close to data governance, they will end up in this at the end, in this category. Even if we want to take the broader category of governance and break it down into smaller pieces, at the end it's the same thing, and you need all of them in order to at the end deliver what the company is looking for, what the customer is looking for. Yeah. So anyway, I'm looking forward to have like another episode with her in the future, like discuss more about all these challenges with like integrating with all the different sources and applications, and how to parse all this information, and how you integrate information and present it at the end to the user. That's like something that we didn't do that much, but I'd love like to continue the conversation with her in the future.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us on the DataStack show. Subscribe if you haven't, tell a friend, and we will catch you on the next one. Shinji, welcome to the DataStack show. We are so excited to chat with you today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
All right. Well, let's start where we always do. Can you tell us about your background, which is fascinating, by the way? You've had, heavy duty data engineering roles. You are a successful founder with a previous company, which is really cool. So we want to hear about that. But tell us about your journey and what led you to starting SelectStar.
Sure. Yeah, really excited to be here. I have a computer science background, worked as a software engineer, data scientist, product manager, data engineer in the past. Primarily, doing sales forecasting modeling, or looking into a lot of SQL, or building ETL pipelines, I would say, is something that I used to do 10, 12 years ago. Fast forward, I started a company in 2014 called Concourse Systems. We were having a lot of trouble scaling our real-time data pipeline at a mobile ad network that was growing very fast, hitting about 10 billion events a day. Flink or Spark Streaming didn't really exist back then. Built our own solution and spun it out as a company, and that's Concourse Systems. So that company, after 2 years, I sold it to Akamai. Now it's a product called the IoT Edge Connect, where it's designed to process, billions of data points coming from different IoT devices around the globe, utilizing Akamai's CDN Edge network. And from that experience at Akamai, starting to work with global enterprises, especially in automotive and consumer electronics space, I've noticed that next frontier of issues that are starting to happen was around utilizing data that companies have collected and have processed and is sitting in the data warehouse, being able to find and understand, and hence being able to actually pull insights and analysis out of data is actually starting to become a lot harder than it should be. So this is why I started SelectStar, so that we can give more context around data, so that any data analyst, data scientist, or anyone that has access to data can easily find and utilize data as they need.
Love it. And I'm going to steal one of Kostas's classic questions here because he loves to talk definitions. But could you give us your definition? You call SelectStar a data discovery tool. What's your definition of data discovery? You kind of covered a couple of the pain points, there at a high level, but would love your definition of data discovery.
Yeah, I mean, just utilizing the term discovery in a way, like we believe data discovery is all around increasing the discoverability of your data. So that means basically being able to find and understand data sets that you have access to. So what that means is regardless of where you're starting from, meaning even if you may not know what the field or the data set may be called, by just typing a certain keyword, something that's related, you should be able to find the right data sets that you're looking for. And on top of that, whenever you're looking at a data set, it's not, sometimes you can try to query the data to see what's inside, but more often the data may, even though you may see the data, it may not be exactly what you're looking for, because it might have been filtered from before or was aggregated differently than what you expected, so on and so forth. So truly understanding the data is the other component of, I would say, data discovery. And a lot of that will come from understanding where the data came from, who's using this inside the company, and where it's being used, and how this is being used. So we call that a data context. So data discovery can really happen, cannot happen without context. So having a lot of context, providing that context, I would say, is what data discovery platforms do.
Yeah, super helpful. So can we dig into some of the conditions? I would say both from a technology standpoint, but also from maybe sort of a team or company standpoint that are big drivers for companies who need a tool like SelectStar. And I'm thinking, I think our listeners probably span a wide range, right? We probably have some that say like, okay, well, data discovery for me is, we're running Snowflake and I can just scroll through all the tables and I have a pretty good sense of what's going on, to companies that have, probably a mixture of on-prem and cloud infrastructure across data lakes, warehouses, production databases, and, have a pretty complex setup. So could you help describe sort of the, where on that spectrum do you see a lot of your customers, in terms of their stack?
Sure. So I would say traditionally, enterprise data catalogs and other mechanisms to increase data discoverability was introduced mainly because companies have so many different sources of data. So just putting them all into one place as a place that is an inventory that you can search through, that was primarily the need. But today, that's really not always the case. There are still a lot of different sources of data, but all of those data are arriving at a single location, whether that is a data lake or a data warehouse. So the main issue around data discoverability, it's not that you don't know where to go. It's just that even when you are in Snowflake, even when you have access to all the data, you have to sift through hundreds and thousands of different schemas and database tables in order to locate what you're looking for. And even then, you may not be 100% sure whether this is something that you're truly going to use or not. So to me, one of the, so there are three main levers that I see when companies really need the data discovery tools. So first and foremost is once you have a single source of truth and you have like a data warehouse where all of your data is arriving in one place, and you're recognizing that the number of tables are growing. Number of schemas are growing, and it's starting to become a little bit more cumbersome to just refer to, well, you can just use this schema and there are only 10 tables or 20 tables. So as number of tables go beyond the hundreds, I think this is one area that you would want to put in some type of data dictionary, some documentation to start putting together more context around the data sets. The other part that we see as a lever is data teams growth. So this also happens as data growth, but sometimes, you may have just a small data team that manages large volumes of data sets. And from here, as you are trying to bring on new data analysts or data scientists or data engineers, for them to ramp up, it just takes a lot longer time than you anticipate because there's so much tribal knowledge within the data sets. And you may also realize that this tribal knowledge is also very hard to transfer without a significant effort. And you may realize this because, someone decides to lead the company, and you're realizing, oh, like shit, like how are we gonna make sure that all the pipelines and materialized views that they built is going to stay sound even after they leave. So I think just overall training, onboarding, and making sure all the data team members are on the same page. This is like one of the goals that customers try to achieve. Last but not least, there is also, I would say, some companies that start thinking about data discoverability because it gets triggered by data governance. So data governance initiatives where you may need to understand the actual data flow and the model of how the data pushes through different stack or different models. You need to start putting together either documentation or start tracking where the data is heading to. And this is very hard to do manually. So having an automated discovery tool is another reason why companies start looking for solutions like SelectStar.
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think earlier this week, or maybe the end of last week, there was a Slack message floating around, and it was a new analyst asking people who'd been around for a long time, what is this table? And it's like, okay, you got to, find the people who've been around the longest in the company and who've been close to the stack and the data and the reporting. So even, we're not a huge company, but we see that every day. One more question from me before I hand it over to Kostas. So you mentioned data governance, and one of the funny things about the data industry is there's all sorts of terminology, right? So you have data governance, data observability, data quality, etc. Where do you see SelectStar fitting into that spectrum, right? Because you do, discoverability, isn't necessarily, it's related to quality, it's related to governance, like there's some components there, but I would just love to know, where do you see SelectStar on that spectrum?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So we see ourselves as more of a horizontal platform that syncs and interacts with different stacks of data. So whether that is on the data like generation side to the data storage side to BI side, or the transformation side, we want to plug in and bring out all the metadata together in one place, and also give you more of a comprehensive analytics of that metadata, so that you have a one place that you can find out what is happening and how different data assets are related to another, regardless of the tool that you are looking at. So we see data discovery as more of like a capability that supports data democratization, because this allows everyone to be able to easily find and understand data. Secondly, data governance. So governance regarding if you want to, and the main difference that I see data governance and data, which both goes hand in hand. A lot of the metadata management really is around being able to collect all the metadata, house it in one place, having a unified metadata model that you can collect and utilize, and including operational metadata as well as like the catalog type of metadata. Governance is really kind of like a layer on top of that allows you to add ownership, policies, and ways to like put a taxonomy on top of that. So we see discovery as a supporting capability for all those use cases, because once you have this really good amount of discoverability, which is backed by the auto-generated context that we give you, whether that is including like data lineage, popularity, who's using what, top users, and different queries joins that ran, or like entity relationships that we see. Like these are the components that you can use to drive the policies, to define which ones that you want to measure the quality for, and to also give access to whom. So that's kind of how we see data discovery playing in those use cases.
Super helpful. All right, Kostas, I have been monopolizing. Please take the mic.
Thank you so much. All right, so Shinji, you were going through like how things work when you were talking with Eric, and you were saying that like, okay, the data has to be collected into one place. Usually this is like the data warehouse, and on top of like the data warehouse, then we can start like creating like the data catalogs and enable data discovery. And I'm wondering, like, when we have like all the data in the data warehouse, why do we need like another service on top of the catalog that the data warehouse has in order like to understand what kind of data we have there and what we can do with this data? Like why the database itself is not enough?
Sure. The catalog that the database has, or what we call information schema, is really just the structure of the physical metadata. And that is pretty much like where we are starting from as well. But what data discovery platform does on top of that is way more than just showing the metadata. It is, we will go through all the SQL query history, all the activity logs, and also connections that other tools may have with that data warehouse to try to put together like where the data is flowing into and how the data is being used. So like the thing that we do at SelectStar is really parsing through different SQL query history and then piecing that together into a form of different data models that everyone can consume. Like column level lineage, regardless of where you're starting from, you can see all the upstream sources of data as well as the downstream effect that one metadata change may have. You can see like how many people were utilizing this table or column in the last 90 days and how often has it been used, which dashboards or other tables or queries like this is flowing into, so you can see the impact of like where this data is going to. And going further, like we are now showing like more like an ER diagram, so that even if data warehouses or data lakes have lost the properties like primary keys and foreign keys, those can be detected, or if they are already in there, that plus like any of the joins that we recognize can be put together as more of a data model so that you have a visual of how different tables are connected to each other. These are all the parts that I would say is more of it's not a core features of databases today. And I think also when you look at data discovery, it's a lot more powerful as you are starting to connect, different tools you're using on top of the data warehouse. So being able to see your Looker dashboard, which upstream tables it's using, or which like LookML views like this is coming from. And vice versa, by changing this production route table or this specific field, how many dashboards may crash in your Tableau server. Things like that, I think, is when it becomes a lot more interesting as a data discovery platform.
All right, that's awesome. You mentioned like a couple of different like sources of let's say information or metadata that is used like to create, let's say, the user experience around SelectStar. The first one you mentioned was like the metadata itself that's coming from the data warehouse or the database system, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like when you say metadata from the data warehouse, what kind of metadata we are talking about and how do you usually use them?
Yeah, so there is like a main, I guess, like base level quote unquote like metadata catalog data, including like names of the tables, columns, schema, database, the comments of that. So hence, like this kind of gives us the structure of like which table belongs to where, things like that. And then there's a part of operational metadata that we collect. So when was this last created? When was this last updated? What may be the DDL or DML that's related to this? Like who's queried this the last time? And some databases also provide things like the row count, how big the table is, things like that. So those are things that we utilize to basically try to give a snapshot of like what that table looks like and what the current state of the table today is. So that's kind of like what we consider as like the kind of like a core main metadata. And then there is the aspect around, I think I mentioned the table column comments, but this is the description side. So description usually is, we consider it as like a part of the metadata because it's already baked into the database itself. And then on top of that, there is the logs that we collect. So the logs, I wouldn't call it like a fully metadata, but it is something that we can basically parse through to generate metadata, because I define metadata as data that describes the data set. So the query logs will tell us like who's querying what, how long does it take, and what are the resources that it uses from that query, and from that query itself, which tables and columns are being queried. Is it being queried directly? Is it and whenever we are looking at the actual transformation, is it being transformed, or is it getting aggregated, or is the data actually being used as is? These are all like details of kind of like extracting the metadata information about the query, so that we can analyze it under the same umbrella to make the like what we call our like a table page, a column page, our object data asset page to be much richer. Does that make sense? Yeah, and then last but not least, there's the user metadata as well. So it's more lightweight, but just more of like how many users, like which users, like how is it, how are they logging in? When's the last time this person was logged in? Like things like that.
Yeah. You actually like answered like some of my follow-up questions, to be honest, because I wanted also like ask like about the other sources. Actually, I will, but before we do that, about like the metadata that each data warehouse like is exposing out there, have you noticed like any considerable like difference between the different technologies that you are integrating with? Is there like, are all the systems out there on par, or is you wish there was something more out there in terms of like the core metadata, right? We're not talking about like queries and logs and stuff like that right now.
I think the core metadata are primarily similar from one database to another. But the way to retrieve metadata and the type of access that we need just to get the metadata can be drastically different.
Okay.
And this is something that we really care about, because as a metadata platform, by default, we try to carve out or give recommendations to our clients that give us access only to the metadata, but not to their actual data.
Yeah.
And every database is slightly different in this way, where, like, for example, with Snowflake, we may have just the access to their metadata database on their called like just Snowflake database account usage. Whereas for something like Oracle or Postgres, there are or Redshift, there are very specific types of tables that we would require for access instead of, I guess, getting a quote unquote like metadata database access, because those will be generally only available for admins.
Yeah.
So it's that's where I think things get very tricky. The other part is also how the logs are generated. So yeah, some data warehouses, like this will be already in a table, like for query history, whereas some other data warehouses, we would need to ask the customer to enable the logging, and then enable like other types of logging too, and then also have them to point to their CloudWatch logs to go to this bucket, or so there can be like more of this integration setup that can be required depending on the database we are working with. And for BI, it's also a whole another story.
Of course, of course.
It'd be different. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get there. All right. And the next thing that I found like quite interesting that you mentioned is that like there's a lot of metadata that's generated by parsing the queries. My first question is, have you seen any kind of like resistance from like your customers so far to expose these queries to your service? The reason I'm asking is because you mentioned already that, okay, you're a metadata platform. You don't want like to get access to the data itself, but queries many times can reveal, let's say, through the logs, also like important information that shouldn't be leaked, right? Like it's always like a little bit like tricky. So how do you see that like so far? Like how do you see customers and like the companies out there react to that?
Yeah, so a few things. First and foremost, this has always been a concern of mine when I first started SelectStar. So my last company, we had an on-prem software where we just deployed to our customers' environments. So we didn't have to worry about this. But with Akamai, as I was building more of a platform as a service product, this provenance of data and security on the data side is something that I just like had a lot more interest in. So with SelectStar, this is from the get-go, we got our type 2 audit and making sure that everything is treated as confidential information of customer, even though if it's just the metadata. We will first make sure that we're not getting as much data as possible, and then anything that we bring to our system, we will treat it with the best amount of enterprise security that we can add in. So that's the first thing. Second part is with logs. It really kind of comes down to depending on what kind of queries you're running. So first of all, we have a very specific types of queries that we process. Mostly around the creation of the queries like DDL, DML, things like that, but also a lot of select queries. So what we allow our customers to do is allowing them any sensitive fields in SelectStar. And if it's already tagged as PII or sensitive, from our parsing perspective, we will strip out all those values before we fully process it in SelectStar. So anything that you might come across through SelectStar, whether that is a query or something else, because you can look up different queries from SelectStar, like you can look at like how this table was created or what are the popular queries that people use to utilize this table. You can look up other people's queries by going into their profile pages or team pages. So when these queries show up, we will strip out these values if the field was already defined as if it's PII or sensitive. So that's like another way where we are ensuring any of the sensitive data itself does not enter our platform. And last but not least, we are starting to allow more customers, initially just as a trial, and this is something that will be available in the future, but for them to just like load the metadata themselves or load the logs themselves. So if they want to strip out any specific parts, or if they give us a certain configuration as more of like, we don't want any of the queries of like this user to come through, then those are fairly straightforward settings that we can adjust so that we basically filter out or we don't touch any of those queries from the get-go. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. It's like super interesting, like to see like the complexity of like building a product around that, and like it's many things that like people don't realize if they they didn't have like reason to go through like this kind of process, or using this kind of products, or like establishing this kind of processes, right? And it's like a big part of like the product itself, and the complexity of building like such a product. It's not just like the metadata that's you have to process. It's also like all these processes that there are for a good reason there, around like security, around like auditing and all that stuff. That's we need like to pay attention and make sure that we provide all the functionality that our customers need, right?
Yeah. So this is like something that we also see, like, not just to like strip out the data, like, marking something as sensitive or PII. It is something that customers can really leverage to specify any of their sensitive data sets to the rest of the company. And because these data sets are not exposed in Selexar in whatsoever, even if the end user may have access to it, they can actually understand that, oh, this is not something that I should easily share or freely share with others, right?
Yeah.
The order data, where is it being used, and like where did it go? So any of these like reporting around GDPR, CCPA has been one of the areas that some of our customers are starting to use Selexar for. And this happens one from the usage perspective, but the other also as a lineage perspective, because then you can follow the trail of where this data exactly ended up in, and then try to get kind of like the usage information or audit logs of all of those fields altogether.
And okay, about like parsing the queries, what kind of information you are looking for there? Like, how do you decompose, let's say, the query into metadata that can be used on a data catalog? Like, what are you doing there? That's probably one of like, I wanted to ask this question like since we started, so I'm really happy that I can do it now.
So your question is like, what are we actually doing in the parser with the SQL stuff?
Yeah.
So I think that in high level, there are a few things we're doing. I mean, we are not trying to like, like reverse engineer the query. So I think there is like many different things that happen until it gets executed in the database. Like if you are using DBT, or if you are using like, any like a templated queries through a BI tool, like so many things may happen. But what we care about is at the end of the day, how did it execute and how does that look like on the database perspective? So a few things that we're looking for is first, we are looking at like what are the fields and tables that are actually being selected. And so that is coming from like just looking at, it can be through different CTEs and the different like nested queries, but we will look at like, so how are like the result of this query being mapped, and where did that source come from? Around that source, we will we will try to define, to match the existing metadata that we have. Because we already, and that's kind of almost like matching the dictionary. Sometimes we may not find everything, but as long as it's all loaded into Selexar, we should be able to find it. And from there, as we are looking at the field level connection, that's when we will try to determine whether we can tell what the general relationship is the field being generated as is, it's just like or is this field that is being aggregated or transformed? These are some of the details that we try to build in. There are more things that we plan to do and want to do, but that's kind of like more of the extent of how we look at the queries. So a lot of these information that our parser exports that will go into kind of like our backend model. So different backend models. So this would be used. So for any of the select queries, this will go into more of like the usage. Like we'll we have a popularity score for every field, every table. So this is like where this gets added to. If this was a DML, DDL queries, then we will add this as more of information for our lineage. So that's like determining for this specific field, this is a source of the field, and then here is a target, and it's being propagated as in this manner. Like things like that is basically what our like core parsing does.
Super interesting.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, okay, like I can keep like discussing about that for a long time, but I think, like
yeah, we're going definitely deep here.
Yeah, we have
and then we have I was gonna say we have like a similar parsing that we use for DBT or LookML, like YAML files, like and for ETL, it's a little bit different, right? So we try to basically follow through the data model each stack has, and map it to like the metadata model that we have of lineage, popularity, entity relationship, things like that.
Interesting. And okay, let's leave the databases behind for a little bit, and let's go to the BI tools, right? Because you also have like to interoperate with them and like pull out like information. And okay, database systems obviously have been developed from day one to access information, but okay, BI tools are mainly like visualization tools, right? So how you can automate like this process, and how you can go like to a system like Looker and pull out like useful metadata.
Yeah, so it doesn't happen overnight. We have to go in and look at the BI tools data model. And we try to map out how, like our integration process requires mapping out like which metadata of the BI tool will map to like the BI metadata that model that we have. And if there are parts that our BI metadata tool may not have, what are the other models that we may need to augment in order to support that BI integration? And every integration that we have will have, lineage, popularity, top users, and the kind of like the integration into like any of the data, the actual like the database connections. And all of these happens very differently per BI tool. So for example, with Looker, we get a lot of the Looker like Explorer dashboards, user information directly from their API. But your Looker API does not expose LookML information. It just gives you maybe just the Explore information, but it does not tell you like the actual view, which view it's coming from, and which specific connection does that view have. So for those, like we usually either get a snapshot of the LookML repo from the customer, or we connect directly to their repo as a read-only mechanism to load and parse the LookML views so that we can bridge the connection between the data warehouse and Looker. On the other hand, for something like Tableau, Tableau has a metadata API that will expose a lot of this through GraphQL API, but we also use their REST API because it gives the other information that we need. But for something like Tableau, companies use it to run dashboards through the Tableau data model, which can come from the API. But some of the workbooks and dashboards will run through what they call quote unquote custom SQL. So in those cases, like we would have to fetch the SQL separately run through our parser against the connection that we see on Tableau, and then bring out the result and add it to the lineage.
Yeah.
So it really kind of depends on the BI tool, but we try to basically look at how does this like BI tool actually work, and what is their view of the data, and hence how are they defining the dashboard and charts and metrics, and we try to basically map them, because eventually the view that we have, and some of our customers have like multiple BI tools, when they want to see all dashboards together, like by just typing a keyword, we do have areas that we want to consolidate this under like the same umbrella too, right? So that's the exercise that our team has to go through to ensure that integration is done correctly.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Okay, one last question from me, and then I'll give the microphone back to Eric. Okay, many times, like especially like people that are coming like with an engineering background, like we tend to let's say abstract things to a point that become too ideal, right? Like we are talking about like the data stack, and we have like the ETL pipelines, the data warehouse, and then we have some consumers that are going to be some BI tools and like all that stuff. But reality is many times like it's a little bit different, like, right? Like every company is doing things just a little bit like in a different way. Users are not exactly always following the rules. I mean, I do that like many times, like I get frustrated with the tool and I just like export the CSV and push it into like a Google Sheet and just do what I want to do and that call it a day, right? So, and I'm sure like you see that also like in companies out there. In your opinion, like how much like tools that have to do with governance, that they have like to do with data discoverability and like providing, let's say, like this kind of infrastructure for like the users inside the company and the company itself, like to have like the best possible visibility on how data is getting used. What are the limits there, in your opinion? Like, do you think that we will, like, is it a problem? Do you think that like we have to still like work to do with like products like Select Star to provide like a more coverage around governance, or is it like at the end it's like it's okay, like we could just have like to accept that people will not always follow, let's say, like the rules, and like there are always going to be exceptions, and that's fine, it's part of like designing the product, and we are going like to cover, let's say, 80-90% of like the use cases out there, and always keep in mind that like some things might be always a little bit different. Did I confuse you? Because I feel like I just talked too much. But let me know, like I can rephrase the question.
Yeah, no, I can see where you're coming from. Like, I guess one question from here is like, do we get to just accept the fact that people are going to do their own thing and it's not all understandable, discoverable, whatnot. I think that given that we are still working with systems, still working with something that have like parsed and hence like has compiled and is out there, we see it as something that we can process. And our job is to process it and show you what it actually looks like, so that you don't have to do that manual work. Once you start trying to add like a manual lineage, or like something that is beyond what like something that's additional, like in the same level of like like if like meaning if we can parse everything of what you've done, then what's the point of trying to like augment the automation by adding something manual, especially if you cannot maintain it. The big part about automation in the beginning is so that you can save a lot of time and you don't have to do this manually. At the same time, I think that actually the bigger ROI of automation is that you don't have to maintain it, because you don't have to go and update or delete or add anything, because your data model changes so fast. And the part that we recommend our customers to maintain more manually would be more around business processes, documenting business processes, making sure that those are clearly defined and has the domain data model that's connected to it. These are things that we won't be able to automatically define for you, but in terms of lineage or usage, things like that, these are, I think, much better for us to leave it to the machine to figure it out. That's how I think about it. But it also means yes, we do have a lot of work to do to ensure that everything is being processed fully and correctly.
Yeah, but that's a good thing, because it means that there is an opportunity there, right? To build products and businesses. So that sounds like pretty big opportunity, actually. So, Eric, all yours. I think we are close to the buzzer, as we usually say, but
wow, I stole one of your typical questions, and so you steal my line.
Oh yeah. I had to take my revenge.
Yes.
So, all yours.
Shinji, my question is sort of getting maybe to some of the practical implications of what you and Kostas just discussed, and it's around, I would say, at what point you reach economies of scale in terms of coverage, and then what the relationship between ongoing work and new data coming in looks like typically, because one of the blessings and curses of modern data tools and sort of the way more cost efficiency in terms of data storage, right? It's never been cheaper to pull in a huge amount of any type of data and store it, right? And so at a lot of companies, you see, even smaller companies, you see, call it whatever you want. Well, I'll say maybe large amounts of potentially unnecessary data flowing into the system, in part just because it's technically very easy to pull the data in, right? And so when you think about, cataloging and discovery, it seems like you kind of hit an economy of scale where you get a certain amount of coverage, but then there's always new data flowing into the organization. So what does that look like? How do you manage that relationship, and is it a lot of ongoing maintenance? And what do you see on the ground with companies that are dealing with that?
I mean, the fact that there are new data sets being added every day and new models being created or dashboards being created every day is the pure reason why somebody would adopt Select Star than other tools or other ways to manually track this metadata. Because we will, every 24 hours at minimum, we will update all your metadata, all your lineage popularity, the way that it's being used, so that you can always trust that whenever you're looking at Select Star, it is up to date and it has all the latest and greatest information. It is really the only way to keep your metadata in one place, only when it's really automated, in my opinion. And I think in terms of cost perspective, cost is moving to compute, right? It's easier, it's cheaper to store it, but now you are running a query and that's going to cost you some amount. It's easy to schedule the query, and it's going to be, I don't know, $1, $2, but it's going to add up. So this is another reason why it's important to be aware of the usage patterns, because we actually see a lot of customers ending up saving their cloud data cost because they end up finding these pipelines and these materialized views and tables being created, fueling dashboards that are not being looked at anymore.
Yep.
And that can really only come through by having both lineage and usage model popularity together. So I think it's more of an ongoing effort, and whenever it's an ongoing thing that you want to monitor or just refer to as the right place to go, then you would want that tool to be automated and is up to date with the state of the data, storage and consumption, wherever that's happening.
Yep, that makes total sense. And so, do you see a lot of Select Star customers really the automation runs and they're essentially just reviewing new information, right? It seems like there's just very little adjustment to the model, or the automation.
So I think twofold. First 6 months of a lot of customers using Select Star, they use it as if it's their Google for data. They already have a lot of data. And through Select Star, they're finding information about this table or that dashboard or this pipeline that they didn't know about before. Even we hear customers all the time saying that they've been using this data warehouse or they've been using Looker for the last 2 years, and Select Star is telling them things that they didn't know about for their own data model. And this is more of the value that we drive in the beginning, so that you are actually you didn't have to do any work other than connecting your database, but you're seeing a lot of new things that you didn't know about your data. And usually after 3 to 6 months, customers a lot of our users start using this data to either deprecate old dashboards and tables. They start putting some taxonomy together. They may add some documentation. And this is where the real data management, data governance really starts happening. And they have a lot of cues, a lot of directions and hints to start off, because they're getting this visibility and insight of how their data is being used today.
Yeah, what a great answer. I don't think I asked that question very well, but you answered it perfectly in terms of sort of the life cycle of usage and when you get over the learning curve of sort of the initial, economies of scale of, sort of understanding or learning about your data and then sort of taking action on it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is because they get to find something new every time they come back to Select Star. So this actually fuels really good user engagement cycle. Yep. And as they start inviting others, as they are referring to different Select Star links, they realize, as I'm gonna start sharing this with more of my data teams, this product manager and whatnot, I better also put some more documentation, or I better put some more context. Yep. Because we are referring to this anyway, because this is already has more than half of the documentation automatically filled in and is being updated.
Yep, love it. Very cool. Super helpful. Well, this has been such an interesting show. Love the concept of Google for data, Google for your own data. I think that's, that sounds exciting, even to me. So I know a lot of our listeners will be interested in it. So Shinji, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and teach us about data discovery.
Awesome. Thanks for having me here. This was fun. I think we went pretty deep on multiple subjects, but you guys have been great.
Welcome to the Data Stack Show prequel, where we talk about the show that we just recorded. To give you a teaser, Kostas, one of the phrases that was used in the show towards the end, which was really interesting, was a lot of our customers initially find this tool to act like a Google for their own data, which I thought was a really interesting concept. What was your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think the complexity of working with data like explodes really, really fast. I mean, if you start like collecting data from a couple of sources and then you start joining the data together and creating like pipelines and all that stuff, it's like super, super hard, like for someone who hasn't been there since the data started to get collected, like to figure out what data is needed and what its piece of data means and what to trust and what not to trust and what's used by which tool and all that stuff. So and this is like true, like even like in small companies, like you don't need to go to have like thousands of tables there for this to happen. But yeah, like it grows like, I don't know, probably like in a very exponential kind of nature. So yeah, like having the ability to just go there and like search for something and like come up like with a table that might be helpful for what you are looking for, I think makes total sense. Like I'd love to have this kind of like Google simplicity in like searching the data of the company and then figuring out like how to connect them together. So that's, I think, like is a very, very good feedback to get for your product.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the things that, was apparent in the conversation, but, it's easy to think about the steps of data flow being, sort of distinct things that happen in a particular order, as very clear steps, right? So it's like, okay, well, we got to ingest data. We need to transform it somehow. Then you model it, and then you have BI, right? And it's like 1, 2, 3, 4. And the reality is that modeling, transforming, modeling, and BI are all like highly iterative processes, right? And you have to go through a long life cycle until you get things that are durable enough to where they don't change a lot. To your point, even in a small company. And I think it was just a helpful reminder, and you mentioned this actually in the introduction, that understanding your data, knowing what data you have, really is a key first step in actually enacting governance, which is ultimately what Shinji of SelectStar is helping people do. And she dug into that on the show. You got pretty technical, which was really interesting. How do you do that and automate lineage and metadata and all that sort of stuff? So if you are interested in anything around lineage, data governance, metadata, and data discovery, you'll definitely want to check this one out, and we will catch you on the next one.